Hi. The steak was overdone. The wine was decent. The room was humid with ego. It was the kind of corporate victory dinner where everyone pretends they've already spent the coming bonuses, watches glinting a little brighter, voices pitched a little louder. We'd landed the Triarch account, an 8-figure deal that would keep Grant's corner office safe for another year. Grant himself stood at the head of the long table, sleeves rolled, bourbon in hand. His grin was permanent, the smug, practiced sort that came with boardroom immunity. "Hell of a job, gentlemen," he said, raising his glass. "Next time, send your wives to the client dinners. Might earn yourselves an even bigger bonus." The room cracked up. A couple of the VPs slapped the table. One of the analysts choked on his scotch. I forced a polite smile. No more. Under the table, my thumb traced the seam of my napkin, slow and deliberate. Harmless joke. Office nonsense. But something in the delivery. It wasn't just Grant's usual sleaze. It landed different. He wasn't pitching to the room. He was looking straight at me when he said it. Long enough for it to register. Long enough to feel like something rehearsed. I logged it. Didn't react. Just tucked it into the back of my mind with the other small oddities I'd been noticing around the edges lately. Later that night back home, the mood was quieter. Dinner was late, takeout from that Italian place she liked. She had already poured herself a glass of wine by the time I walked in. The house smelled faintly of her perfume, stronger than usual. I set down my keys, loosened my tie. She looked up from her phone, smiled, the warm, easy smile I'd known for years. For a few moments, it felt like any other night. We ate on the couch, plates balanced on our laps. I told her about the dinner, the deal, the overdone steak. And then, almost as an afterthought, I mentioned the joke. "Grant said something tonight," I said, swirling the last of my drink. "Joked about sending our wives to the next client dinner. Might get us a bigger bonus," he said. She sipped her wine, smirked, and said without looking at me, "Gladly." No laugh, no wink, no trace of humor. Just a flat, offhand comment, like she meant it. The air in the room seemed to thicken. My mouth went dry. For a beat I just watched her, waiting for some sign, a playful glance, a grin, anything to soften the edge. It didn't come. She set her glass down and picked up the remote. "You want to watch something?" she asked, casual as ever. I nodded. "Sure." But I wasn't listening to the TV. I was replaying that one word, over and over. Gladly. The next morning, I watched her move around the kitchen. Crisp blouse, new heels I didn't recognize. She kissed my cheek on her way out the door. The same routine as always. But something in the way she didn't quite meet my eyes stuck with me. I went through my meetings on autopilot, half listening, half present. My mind kept circling back. I didn't press her. Not yet, but I didn't forget. And I knew this wasn't nothing. Something had shifted. The ground beneath our life had tilted, not enough to see yet, but enough to feel. The morning after that dinner, I tried to forget the way her voice had sounded. I told myself I was being paranoid. One offhand comment didn't mean anything. I made coffee. I watched her moving through the kitchen, barefoot, hair up, humming softly to herself. The image of ease. But then I noticed her outfit. Not the usual sharp but conservative business casual. Today, a tailored dress that showed more than it used to, a style I hadn't seen her wear to work before. The new bag, the designer one, rested by the door. "New project?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Big client in town," she said, tightening her bracelet. "Grant's asked a few of us to show face at tonight's event. Could run late." I nodded. "Late how late?" She shrugged. "Midnight? Maybe later. I'll text." Normal enough on the surface. But something in her voice, the same flatness from the night before, put me on edge. That evening, after she'd left, I found myself pacing the house. I'd never been the jealous type, never the insecure type. Trust had always been a given between us. But now, the balance had shifted. By midnight, no text, no call. At 12:30, my phone finally buzzed. "Still wrapping up. Don't wait up." I didn't reply. I poured a drink instead, sat in the dark, and waited until I heard her key in the lock around 2. She moved quietly, trying not to wake me. I listened to her steps, the rustle of her dress, the faint click of the closet door. The next morning, there was an unfamiliar scent on her coat. Not her perfume. Something heavier, foreign. I didn't confront her. Not yet, but I started paying closer attention. The next clue came unexpectedly. I was reorganizing a kitchen shelf, looking for one of her old cookbooks, something for a weekend dinner we used to make together. As I pulled the book free, a small card fluttered loose and landed face down on the counter. Corporate stationery. I turned it over slowly. Thank you for an exceptional evening. Looking forward to more. R. Grant. My fingers tightened around the card. The handwriting was deliberate. Not casual. Not something meant for team building or professional praise. And it had been hidden, stuffed between the cookbooks, as if shoved there in haste. I replaced it exactly as I'd found it. That was the moment the shift in me became irreversible. I began to watch without reacting. Patterns emerged quickly. Her calendar became more opaque, vague entries like client event and dinner meeting, with no details. New pieces of jewelry began appearing. Not flashy, but noticeable. When I asked where they came from, she'd smile thinly and say, "Just treating myself." She started coming home later. The scent I didn't recognize became a more regular companion on her clothes, her hair. I kept my movements careful, observant. I began cross-referencing her nights out with our financial records. Not the easy stuff, deeper ledgers I'd built for our household budget over the years. That's when small anomalies surfaced. Reimbursement checks from entities I didn't recognize, not her company's name, not one of their known vendors. The amounts weren't large, but they were consistent. I made a list. Dates. Amounts. Cross-checked them with her calendar. Patterns aligned too neatly to be coincidence. Then there was the dry cleaning bill. I found it in the mail stack one afternoon. Addressed to her, but listing a delivery address I recognized. Grant's corporate apartment building. I stared at the slip for a long time. She hadn't mentioned going near that building, much less sending garments there. The final straw, she announced she'd be away for the weekend. A corporate retreat. Mandatory. Where? I asked. She rattled off the name of a private resort. Exclusive. Remote. Who's going? Leadership team, she said too quickly. Some board members. Grant's handling logistics. That told me everything I needed. I didn't confront her. I smiled, wished her a good trip, and offered to drive her to the airport. But inside, the clock had started. The man she thought she'd married, the one who trusted her unconditionally, was gone. In his place now stood a version she didn't know existed, methodical, watching, waiting. The ledger was growing, and I was far from done. By the time she left for the so-called corporate retreat, I'd already shifted gears. It wasn't suspicion anymore, it was investigation. And I approached it the way I approached every complex problem at work, methodically, unemotionally, step by step. First, the financials. Our household budget had always been tight, clean, well logged. I built it that way. Years of careful tracking, spreadsheets, monthly audits. It was second nature. But now, I started over. I rebuilt everything from scratch. Cross-referenced statements line by line. Looked for outliers, anomalies, transactions that didn't fit the long-established patterns. That's when more inconsistencies surfaced. Reimbursement deposits that weren't from her employer, small at first, then more frequent. The entities paying her were shell companies. Vague names, no easy online footprint. I traced one back to a holding company connected to a known consulting firm. Another led, indirectly, to an account linked to Grant's network. The money trail wasn't blatant, but it was deliberate. She was being paid, not through official payroll, not through her company, through side channels, consulting fees on paper. But for what work? There were no records of contracts, no project documentation in her files, no tax paperwork aligning with these payments. Meanwhile, I dug deeper into the address on the dry cleaning slip. Grant's corporate apartment building. Notorious, if you knew the right people. It had quietly surfaced in HR whispers over the years, a place where uncomfortable questions tended not to get asked. Board members had buried past incidents there before, and now her name was linked to it. While she was away, I combed her home office more carefully. Nothing invasive, no broken trust. Just eyes open, mind alert. That's when I found the retreat documents. Folded inside a glossy leadership packet was an itinerary, listing executive leadership alignment, sessions, strategic bonding, dinners, and optional extended stay for certain attendees. No full team, no standard retreat, just hand-picked leadership and guests. I started building what I came to think of as the human ledger. Not just transactions, but behaviors, patterns, changes. Late nights. Unexplained absences, vague answers, shifts in tone. The small details that revealed the erosion of trust. The way she avoided eye contact on certain topics. The way her phone stayed closer to her body than it used to, on silent, face down. The sudden pauses in conversation when I entered a room. The subtle way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. I knew better than to confront her prematurely. I also knew I couldn't handle this alone. So I made a quiet call, to someone I trusted. An old colleague from my earlier corporate days. Someone who'd moved into compliance consulting. Off the record, of course. We met over coffee in a tucked-away spot uptown. I laid out what I had, the payments, the addresses, the pattern of behavior. He listened carefully, asked sharp questions, and finally said, "This isn't just personal. You're looking at something systemic. If Grant's involved, there's leverage here, and likely liability." That's when I began to understand the scope. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. This was an orchestrated game, a power play. My wife wasn't just stepping out of our marriage. She was being groomed, positioned, leveraged for influence, for corporate favors, for side deals. And she was complicit. The growing ledger told the story clearly. When she returned from the retreat, I watched her carefully. She seemed lighter, more energized, but also more distracted, preoccupied. I acted normal, asked about her trip, smiled at her answers. But inside, I was already 3 steps ahead. The ledger was nearly complete, and the next move would be mine. I didn't let the pace slip. Once the patterns became visible, the deeper you looked, the clearer they became. Every piece led somewhere, and I had no illusions anymore. This wasn't about catching her in a lie. It was about understanding how far the rot had spread. Because now, I wasn't just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for my future, my career, and everything I'd built. I started with another quiet conversation, this time with someone deeper inside the machine. An old colleague from my compliance days, still embedded in corporate, sharp as ever. We met off-site, no names exchanged over email, no traceable record. Just 2 former coworkers grabbing coffee, catching up. Over the second cup, I slid a slim folder across the table. Not evidence, not yet, but questions. The shell companies, the reimbursement trail, the connections to Grant's building. He read in silence. When he looked up, his face was grim. "You're not wrong," he said softly. "And this isn't new." That was the first real crack in the wall. Grant had been running side channels for years. Consulting, relationships through off-books entities, bonuses disguised as reimbursements, influence traded for favors, and worse, there were rumors of HR issues swept aside, quiet settlements, the corporate apartment used as leverage, a staging ground for influence, and occasionally worse. With that confirmation, the ledger gained a new layer, context. My wife hadn't stumbled into this. She'd walked into it with her eyes open, or at least, wide enough to know she was playing a game. I shifted from observation to gathering. Documents, financial records. I worked late nights in my home office, poring over files until my vision blurred. More payments surfaced, tied to a shell entity directly linked to one of Grant's holding companies. The deposits lined up perfectly with her client events and retreats. And now, they were growing in size. Then came the second, more devastating layer. Through my contact, I learned that Grant had been padding his own expense reports with those same consulting fees. He was using my wife's side payments to justify inflated expense reports, pushing money through the system in a way that, if exposed, would trigger not just internal audits, but potential SEC violations. And worse, there was chatter that my wife was planning to leave me. Not for love, for leverage. She'd been advised, likely by Grant or one of his circle, to establish her own financial independence through these consulting channels first, to build a safety net. And when the time came, to sever cleanly, with her stake intact. It was a corporate trap, a game of influence, money, and risk, and she was neck-deep in it. I remember one evening in particular, a moment of chilling false normalcy. We were sitting on the couch, glass of wine in her hand, some forgettable show on the television. She laughed at something on the screen, leaned against me, head on my shoulder. I held her steady, calm, my fingers tracing slow circles against her arm. And inside I was ice. Because by then I knew that the person leaning against me wasn't my wife anymore, not in any way that mattered. She was a player in a game I hadn't agreed to join. And soon, it would be my move. The morning after she returned from the so-called retreat, I stood in the kitchen watching the coffee drip slow and steady, hands braced on the counter. She came downstairs humming softly, moving with an ease that cut sharper than any open hostility would have. She looked fresh, energized, hair brushed sleek, new earrings in place. "Good trip?" I asked, voice level. "Productive," she answered, smiling as she slid her phone into her bag. "A lot of planning for next quarter. Might get busy." I matched her smile. "That's good." She kissed my cheek lightly, grabbed her keys, and left. I stayed there long after the door closed. I knew exactly how busy she was about to become, but not in the way she imagined. That afternoon, I made another call, this time to my compliance contact. We met again in the same quiet cafe as before, seated near the back. No papers this time, just conversation. "I need more," I said quietly, leaning forward. "Anything you can give me. I'm close." He nodded grimly, eyes scanning the room before meeting mine. "You heard about the expense report audit?" I shook my head once. "No. It's moving faster than expected," he said, voice low. "Draft flagged major irregularities, at least 2 connected to Shell reimbursements, the same ones you tracked. If this goes external, it's an SEC event." My pulse quickened, though I kept my expression neutral. "How soon?" I asked, voice steady. He exhaled slowly. "Could be weeks. Could be faster if the board panics." I let that settle, then asked the question that mattered most. "And her part in it?" He leaned in, voice even quieter now. "She's deeper than you think. There's chatter she's positioning for a formal consulting role, post-divorce. Bigger cut." I stared at him across the table, breath slow, thoughts moving faster than ever. So it was real. Not speculation. Not imagined. She was actively building her out. Her future was already in motion. A future designed to leave me behind while profiting off the very corporate decay I'd uncovered. That evening, back at the house, the false normalcy nearly suffocated me. She came in late, claimed a last-minute strategy session, had run long, kicked off her heels, poured a glass of wine, and curled onto the couch beside me. "You look tense," she said lightly, brushing a hand over my arm. "Long day," I murmured, keeping my tone even. "Thinking through some things." She leaned her head against my shoulder, scrolling her phone. And I sat there, utterly still, heart beating slow and cold. Because on that very same phone I knew, from timing alone, that she'd coordinated at least 2 recent transfers from the Shell account to a private one I hadn't known existed until this week. Through a contact in forensic accounting, I'd confirmed it. A discreet account under her name, set up through a financial advisor known for helping executives build separation from entangled assets. Her stake was building fast. The same Shell funds Grant had been abusing were flowing directly into her personal war chest, and I knew exactly what the next step in that strategy would be. Divorce. But not a standard filing. One after securing the consultant title, protecting her stake before disclosures could burn the whole scheme down. She wasn't a bystander in this anymore. She was a player. That week, I accelerated my own moves. I gathered complete documentation, full transaction records on her side payments, the Shell entity ownership trail, evidence of expense padding linked directly to Grant's filings, the new private account and timing of transfers, her positioning for future consultancy, sourced through an internal memo my contact provided, which listed her as an anticipated strategic partner. It wasn't just betrayal of marriage anymore, complicity. And if I moved carefully, I could ensure that when the house of cards collapsed, I wasn't standing beneath it. One night, as I worked late in my home office, she appeared in the doorway with a soft smile. "You're working too much," she said, stepping inside. "Come up soon?" I looked at her, really looked, and for a fleeting second, I saw the woman I'd once known. But the weight of the ledger on my desk, and the icy resolve in my chest, left me no room for nostalgia. "Soon," I said, returning to my screen. She lingered, watching me for a moment longer, then left, and I exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the final document I was preparing, the legal packet. Because by the time this unfolded, it wouldn't just be her or Grant at risk. It would be the company itself, the board, the stock, and I was going to make sure my hands were clean, and my exit secure. By the time my packet was ready, the entire shape of the game had changed. I was no longer chasing evidence. I had it. What remained now was execution, strategic, surgical. Not emotional. Not impulsive. If I moved too early, it would give her and Grant room to maneuver. Too late, and the board could bury the fallout before it reached sunlight. Timing was everything. I chose my moment carefully. It started with a quiet call to a board member I trusted, an older executive with no love for Grant's brand of corporate gamesmanship. We met in a private office late one evening. I laid out the full ledger, the payment trails, the expense padding, the personal financial positioning, the shell entities. His face tightened with each page he turned. By the time he looked up, his voice was low, clipped. "This will force disclosure," he said. "You realize that?" "I do," I answered. "And I'm prepared for the fallout." He nodded once. "What are you asking?" "Formal submission of my resignation, with this packet attached, directly to the board." A pause. "Why not go public?" "Because this isn't about revenge," I said flatly. "It's about protecting my position, my integrity, and making sure I'm not collateral damage when this breaks." Another pause. Then he reached for his phone. "It'll be done," he said. The next morning, I prepared the second piece of my strategy. A simple, concise printed summary of everything I had submitted, no details she could contest, no points she could twist, just enough to show her the walls were already closing. That evening, I waited until dinner. She came home later than usual, another supposed client dinner. We ate in near silence, save for her perfunctory small talk. Halfway through, I slid the summary across the table to her. A single sheet. No commentary. She blinked, confused at first. Then she read. Her face drained of color with each line. By the time she looked up, her eyes were wide, throat working soundlessly. I met her gaze, calm, steady. No anger, no dramatics, just the quiet, undeniable weight of truth. "You can keep your bonus," I said softly. "We'll see what it buys you now." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her mouth opened, a protest beginning to form. But the words caught in her throat, because she knew. It was too late. The packet had already been delivered. The board was already moving, and her exit strategy had just collapsed. She sat frozen at the table. I rose, collected my plate, and walked to the sink. My heart was steady. My hands didn't shake, because this was never about destroying her. It was about protecting what mattered, my future, my name, my integrity. And by then, there was no going back. Corporate fallout hit faster than even I anticipated. Within 48 hours of my resignation packet landing in the board's hands, Grant was placed on administrative leave, pending internal review. The official language was cautious, but inside the walls, the truth spread like wildfire. Board members scrambled. Legal teams mobilized. Word leaked fast enough to move markets. A leadership scandal, expense fraud, possible regulatory exposure. By week's end, the stock had dipped sharply. Analysts whispered of an impending SEC probe. I kept my distance, exactly as planned. Personally, the collapse was no less swift. The day after the board acted, she attempted a conversation, pleading, spinning partial truths, framing herself as caught in the middle. But there was no middle left. I listened in silence. When she finally faltered into tearful apology, I answered quietly, "I'm filing. Terms will be in your inbox by morning." No shouting, no accusations, just fact. Her face crumpled, because she knew what was coming next. I'd already engaged counsel, experienced, discreet. Asset protections had been pre-negotiated, contingencies mapped. When my filing landed, it was clean, professional, but utterly final. She countered once, weakly, but with her name now tied to a growing corporate scandal, her leverage was gone. Her consulting path imploded almost overnight. The shell funds froze under audit. Her private account became a liability, not an asset. Friends who once flattered her professional rise began distancing themselves, afraid of guilt by association. Reputation in our circles is fragile, and in her case, it shattered fast. As for me, the label of whistleblower followed me. There were headwinds. Certain offers evaporated. Some doors quietly closed, but others opened. An independent advisory role materialized, consulting for executives navigating ethics and power traps, precisely the world I now understood better than most. A path I hadn't sought, but one I could walk with my head high. Months passed. The divorce finalized smoothly, on my terms. I kept the home, most assets, full control of my financial future. She moved out quickly, quiet, ashamed. I heard she was trying to rebuild, though from a much smaller foundation than she'd envisioned. I'd be lying if I said the scars weren't real. Some mornings, I still caught echoes, the memory of her humming in the kitchen, the weight of her head on my shoulder those last hollow nights. The question of how long she'd been drifting from who we once were. But I no longer chase those answers. Pain lingers, but clarity frees. And now, clarity was mine. I haven't rushed toward anything new. Romance can wait. Trust takes longer. For now, I'm building life on my own terms, measured, intentional. Not to erase the past, but to outgrow it. Funny in a way. Grant joked once that sending my wife might earn me a bonus. Turns out, my resignation cost them far more than that. And what I kept, my name, my integrity, my future, is worth more than any bonus they could have offered. Thank you for watching. Bye.